You're listening to the Everyday Determinator podcast, brought to you by Okafor of the Determinator Collective.
Hello Determinators, and welcome to the Everyday Determinator podcast. Today we're talking to Linda Harding, who's a volunteer and recently appointed chair of the Board of Trustees of Listen Well Scotland. Listen Well Scotland is a charity which provides quality listening training and courses to make a positive contribution to the mental well-being of people in Scotland. Their mission is to develop listening people and a listening culture in Scotland and beyond. So Linda, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into this role of volunteer and chair to the Board of Trustees at Listen Well?
Yes, thank you, Anne, and thank you for the privilege of joining you in this podcast. Yeah, my professional background is in the National Health Service. I was originally a speech and language therapist, and then became a manager, and actually that lasted for about 25 years and was really involved during that time in lots of kind of working with people and so on. And then I actually had a career change, and I've spent the last 20 years actually traveling the world, working with faith-based NGOs, non-government organizations, and with churches, training and mentoring on cross-cultural communication and encouraging, especially, and mentoring young people in up to 100 countries now to make a difference in the world. So that's my kind of twofold professional background. And I moved to Scotland 6 years ago, kind of semi-retirement. And not long after I arrived in Scotland, at a local Nairn, which is where I live, Nairn Book and Arts Festival, I heard a very inspiring woman, Maureen Wilson, speak. And she was speaking about a Listen Well award that her charity, that's Listen Well Scotland, had developed in a local academy, training young people to be good listeners with their peers. And it was just, I have to say, I was so inspired by listening to her. And so I decided to sign up for the Listen Well training to find out more. And that was 3 years ago, Anne, and I've recently just joined the board as chair of trustees.
Well, excellent.
It was amazing. And honestly, when I did the training, you know, it really kind of impacted me. I had 50 years of background as a therapist, as a manager, as a church pastoral worker, as a trained counsellor. I'd spent nearly 50 years listening to people, but realized that a lot of my listening was about giving advice, generating options, trying to solve their problems, sharing my own insights. And when I engaged with Listen Well Scotland, I discovered the value of just listening. And listening in a way where that's all you do. You don't try and solve anyone's problems. You just listen and help them to generate their solutions. It was really different. And I was so impacted.
That's amazing to hear, and it's great to hear your background as well, coming from, you know, NHS speech therapy and then doing 20 years of, you know, sort of pastoral, sort of, I guess, a lot of communication work. Because you talked about cross-cultural communication between different faiths and things. There's a lot of communication needed for those sorts of conversations, a lot of listening, a lot of talking. So it's really interesting to hear that even with all that experience, that it had some impact on you and some realizations for you. I think I generally think of myself as a good listener, but I know I'm also conscious that I can always improve on my skills. And I think for me, I think listening is a an underrated kind of skill. It's undersold. We all think we have it, but actually we don't really do things to improve it. And this is what sparked my interest when I came across Linda, your colleague, on social media. And because you talked about young professionals or young people, and listening is a really good skill that we can develop for our careers to make a difference, isn't it?
Absolutely, Anne. And I think something you said there, that we sometimes listening is not really understood, and people think a lot about talking, but to talk, you've got to listen, and listen well. And I think there is a skill in learning to listen, and it's a skill that people of all ages, I believe, need to learn and can learn. And it's a transferable skill that you can use in everyday life.
No, absolutely. So on that point, it's something we can learn, and this is what the mission of Listen Well is about, is to educate people that this is a skill, I guess, because like you said, we have many conversations in society just now, and it's all about talk more. Yeah. If people are talking, who's listening? And we need to make sure that people are not only just listening, but listening well, because a lot of the conversations we're asking people to talk about are maybe sensitive, or maybe have big emotions attached to them. So it's important that people are listening well, and developing that skill. Part of Listen Well's mission is to do that. So tell us a little bit more about Listen Well, and what that mission involves for you as volunteers, or for the charity as a whole.
Yeah, well, I think the absolute foundation of Listen Well Scotland is the realization and the value that listening is so important, that actually everybody needs to talk. Everybody has a story to tell. And as you've said yourself, Anne, often people have got concerns, and they need to find a way of expressing those. They need to know that their story is really important and worth listening to. So that's the kind of underlying sort of ethos behind Listen Well Scotland, that everybody needs to talk. And especially actually now in this time, after all we've been through with COVID, there is a rise in mental health challenges and well-being. And so I think Listen Well Scotland is seeking to respond to that often unheard cry, could you just listen to me? And listening in a way that is authentic and real, that really, really values the person. Whatever they say is important because it's important to them. And I think the belief that actually, for many people, if they just had somebody who would really listen to them, it may prevent their need for further specialist, intervention. We know that kind of mental health services in Scotland are so overstretched. We read continually like mental health challenges are at epidemic level. But the reality is what Listen Well Scotland is seeking to do is to normalise the need to talk. And so that's the sort of ethos behind Listen Well Scotland. I don't know if you want to ask me any more about that, and then I can explain what the services are.
You certainly pointed to lots of different things in there, but one thing that really resonated with me is that need, that sort of unheard cry about just listen to me. So many times when people get to a crisis point, it is, I just want you to listen, I just want you to hear me, and then we often think that we listen, but do we often hear people really well? And I think that's the difference, and this is what you're trying to help people make that connection. Yes. And there is a real positive impact on mental resilience, mental well-being in general, when we feel heard. A lot of times when we feel heard, we talk about it, and when I feel heard in my workplace, I feel like things get better. When I feel heard at home, it's quite often when people are suffering from well-being challenges, it's because they feel not recognised, they feel invisible, and I think this sort of listening is that missing part of the conversation, because we're encouraging people talk more, talk more, talk more.
Yeah.
But that listening part, I think, is part of that conversation, and it's missed, I think. Would you agree with that?
I would really agree with that, Anne. I think listening is not really understood, and you've kind of said that yourself, that I think there's not enough emphasis on just listening. You know, people understand the professional intervention. I mean, I myself have been a professional counsellor, but actually just listening is a transferable life skill, and there's very little of it around, but it can be taught. You know, I often think about listening, really listening well, and I'll talk to you about the training that Listen Well Scotland offers, but the listening where you are 100% present with that person. And the question is, can you really listen while you're also sending a text on your mobile, where you're reading your Facebook page, where we all feel we multitask, and we do that in everyday life. But I think what I really appreciated when I did the Listen Well Scotland training was, you cannot multitask and listen. It's about being 100% present, and even listening in a way where you're not focusing on your reply. Yeah. Because that was something I found. I was often listening, but half of me was thinking how I was going to respond.
Yeah.
And therefore, you're not actually listening 100%.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of famous quotes as well around that sort of listening for response. You know, a lot of leadership sort of teachings about that listening for response as well. And, you know, we need to, if we're really listening, like you say, we need to get away from that. And I was at a conference just a few days ago, and there was a sports psychologist there called Michael Caulfield, and he'd worked with some big names in football. And what he said he used to do, and one of his big things was talking, and it really struck me because I knew I was having this conversation today. But his sort of like, you know, things for well-being was talking, but also listening. And he, you know, had it as a separate skill set and a separate thing to do for well-being. And I think that's really important, that people are recognizing that. And one of the things he said he used to do as part of, you know, his team talks was just take his dog to the football ground and just walk around with whoever he was speaking to and just listen. You know, he said, just take the dog and we would just talk and listen, you know. And it's just something, it seems so simple and so basic. And I guess something that we all maybe think that we do well. But I think, you know, having started looking at this more, having met Linda and now knowing about this conversation today, you know, I know that it's something I can get better at. So if someone was interested to come to say, Listen Well, because they've made that realisation for themselves, what sort of offering is there for people? What sort of courses or training do you offer?
Yeah, well, Listen Well Scotland, they offer a training. There's a training process, and that training process is to give practical help. It includes practice, it's experiential learning. It can be delivered hybrid, so either online or face-to-face. That face-to-face is just picking up again now. And it's training for all ages. So there's training that's targeted for schools and young people to help schools become safe listening schools, at peer level training, but also training for adults. There's an option as you go through the training. You can choose to become a registered listener and then offer services of what we call listening time for you, one-to-one listening time in a safe space. But many people do the training for their own benefit, to learn how to apply it in their own workplace. So the training, there's an initial training called Let's Get Listening, which is a short online training. It's so accessible. This training is so accessible, and so applicable. It's very practical. And then you can go on and then do the next stage, which is the Listen Well workshop. And then you can move further and do what we call the advanced listening training. So as I say, all online or face-to-face. And really what the training focuses on is helps you to understand the skills of listening and what real good listening is and what it's not, to identify some of the obstacles, like, always thinking about your reply, or sometimes interrupting or even making the assumption that you understand and the other person when none of us fully do. So I think even making sure you don't bring your own story and your own experience into the listening. So that it's practical skills that you can learn through the training courses. And as I say, you could choose then to go on yourself and be a trainer in your workplace or your school or your community, or you could decide to become a registered listener. So those are the options, or you can just use the training for your own life experience to use with your friends and family.
Excellent. So it really sounds like there's something there for everybody, and something for people who maybe just want to get started and test it a little bit in the online course. And I'm going to mention the online course specifically because, as you know, I'm going through that at the moment.
Yes.
So that I can write about this as well, so that I can sort of give a user perspective, so that people can see and understand. I'm going to keep a diary of what my thoughts were before and afterwards, just to see what I've learned and add that in. And also, listeners, I'm going to mention just now, I'm going to sponsor 3 places on that course also. And I'm going to ask you to email me with the word tartan, because Listen Well has their own tartan. Indeed. So if you're listening in and you're listening well, you'll have heard that cue. And if you listen and email me the word tartan, I will get you linked up with Linda and the lovely people at Listen Well for a place to try this course out for yourself as well. With being this is Listen Week, we will do what we can to get other people involved. So that's just a little bit off point. But in terms of the online course, so it's a fairly short course. I think it's 10 hours of learning over 6 modules, isn't it? And covers everything from why you might want to start doing this, all the way through to what is listening and what you can do to be a better listener. Really, that's my understanding at the moment?
Yeah, that's exactly it. You can pace it, you can do it yourself. You actually, when you sign up for, it's called Let's Get Listening, you actually have the opportunity to do it over 3 months if you want to, although most people do it in a much more focused time. But it's designed in such a way you can watch one of the sessions and then have time for your own personal reflection and learning. But you do need to complete the whole process, because then you'll get the maximum benefit from it, and you'll learn about yourself, and you'll find you immediately can apply it. And then, of course, if you enjoy that, then you can go on to do further training.
Excellent. Well, I am very much looking forward to going through that process, and the results of that will be in my blog, which we will share during this week as well. And I will post the link for that in the show notes below, people. So if you're listening to this, or if you are reading it on the screen reader, the show notes will be at the bottom, and it'll have the link to my blog, which will have my experience of the Let's Get Listening course that you can access from the website, when the link for that will also be in the show notes. So we've talked a little bit about the offering and, what Listen Well is on a mission to do, but in a general sense of people maybe looking to use listening for their work, what can people do to gain skills? I know it's maybe part of the courses and things, but what can we generally do if we want to learn to listen better?
I think the training is absolutely essential, because it helps to give you real insights and practice. So I would really encourage people to look at the Listen Well Scotland website. That's www.listenwellscotland.org.uk. There's lots of stories on there of the impact of the training and the impact of people, of what it's felt like to be listened to. And I think just that gains insight, which is really helpful. You've mentioned, Anne, the online course, the Let's Get Listening Online. I cannot recommend that too highly to you, and to all those who are listening. It have great impact. And I think one of the things that's really important is the understanding there's listening and there's listening well. And everyone can learn to listen. Whatever age, whatever your experience, it's never too late, it's never too early. And listening well is a transferable life skill. I found myself, when I did the training, I immediately began to use it in telephone conversations, in calls with friends, with family. It really does change your own awareness. I became so aware of how often I interrupt because I try and finish somebody's sentence for them. And I also was really aware how much I love to sort people's problems. I want to try and I want to find a solution for them. And the realization that if you listen to them, they can find their own solution. They can generate the options themselves. And that's so much more empowering. That's so much more about enhancing their own mental and emotional resilience, and that realization that listening can be such a powerful contributor to our general well-being at this time. So yeah, you can use your listening skills in everyday life and make a positive difference to someone's world somewhere.
No, I mean, that's great. And I think it's really important to notice as well that when we are listening, but perhaps not listening as well as we could, a lot of these things that we do are come from a good place. We try and interrupt because we're trying to be helpful. We're trying to help people fix their problems because we genuinely want to help. But actually, sometimes the best thing that we can do for them is just to take a step back and just let them, let them be, let them process. And let them figure it out. And sometimes that may be that they need assistance, but I think a lot of the times it does come from within. It's just I've had some coaching sessions, and sometimes it is really powerful just to let someone go, it's on you. I'm listening, I'm here, I'm hearing everything you're saying, and just that being able to process it all the way through for yourself actually makes you realize sometimes what it is at the core of the problem. Sometimes it's not always just what we think it might be, sometimes it's a little bit deeper. And actually by having that space and someone just to really listen, it really helps us to get to that point. So I really understand that point of it, and I'm looking forward to being able to go through the training myself and understand where this, where I'm falling down as a listener at the moment. I'm very conscious as well. I sometimes do interrupt, and I also try and finish people's sentences also. So very similar to your starting experience. And again, it's always just from a place of trying to be helpful, and trying to offer advice or trying to comfort people. But actually, I can probably do more good if I just take a step back. So I'm really excited to find out what I learn about myself in the process, and I'm sure there'll be lots. Probably things I'm not aware of yet as well. So
absolutely,
I'm really looking forward to that.
That's great.
So we're talking about listening, and you mentioned before as well about it being quite complex. Because like everybody's different, as we are in our wonderful ways. Tell us a little bit more about that. What does that mean in terms of the training? So if we have this training, obviously it's accessible to everybody. Listening is a complex thing we've mentioned. How does that work then? So if the training is the same for everybody, how does it work, and how do we be able to understand those complexities within ourselves with a training that is made for everybody?
Well, I think there's a process in the training. So you've got the initial one, which you've signed up for, you're going to do, Anna, and then, there's the next one. And then by the time you get to the advanced course, there's a lot more sort of self-evaluation and self-reflection and really going quite deep in your own journey. So there's a lot of practice where you, as the trainee, are talking about yourself to a trained listener. So you're really getting in touch with your own journey and what might be some of the trigger points or obstacles in your own story that might impact negatively actually on your listening. So that's part of the process of learning. Another really key thing that I think is important to understand in the listening training that Listen Well Scotland provide, we are not training people to be counsellors. We are not training people to be therapists. We're very, very clear about this. We're just training in just listening. So part of the training raises awareness of when somebody might raise an issue that is beyond the scope of just listening. So there is clear training of when you need to point somebody for professional input, intervention of, medical or, mental health practitioners or counselling. The Listen Well training is just about listening, but includes understanding of the complexity of, as you said, our makeup as human beings. And it's the first step. And whilst for a lot of people, that is all they'll need, and it will empower them and help their own well-being and generate solutions, of course, there will be those that have more complex needs, and they will require further professional intervention. And in the training, we don't address how to provide that. That's for trained professionals, but we signpost, we help people to understand when they need to kind of press the button and say, further intervention is required. So it's really important, especially for your listeners who are professional people, who, from my perspective as a professional person, we all can benefit from this listening training, but there is such a need for professional intervention for a segment of people.
Yeah, and for specific things as well, that, nobody could be expected to be a specialist in all of these things. It's just impossible. So it's great to know that, and it's a really good point to make as well, because we're not expecting people to take on, other people's, feelings, emotions. It's just listening and then signposting to appropriate professional services when required. And I guess, is there some, obviously you're operating across Scotland, so predominantly your resources will be Scotland focused, I presume, but I guess you have partners or, maybe an awareness of the types of services that are available in Scotland. Would that be right? Or
yes, there's a list of resources where people can be referred onto and and signposted to. And yes, it is a Scottish charity, although with the online training, people can access it from wherever. But in terms of the follow-up resources, that would be predominantly signposting for resources in Scotland. Yeah.
No, that's great, and it's great to know that sort of resource point is, obviously I'm based in Scotland, but that is there and available to people who are going through the training as a starting point, at least. And I guess people may know of their own preferred services in their own areas as well, or charities or resources that they have used themselves that may be appropriate for whoever they are listening to at the time. So
and it might be just worth me adding too, and that all those who are trained trainers and listeners within Listen Well Scotland, there's a sort of support framework around those people, so that that there's a professionalism in the delivery of the training and listening that has supervision built into it, within the boundaries of what the just listening approach is. And all the training is CPD accredited as well. I should probably mention that for those for whom that is of interest.
Yeah, no, that's really great to know as well, because I know certainly as professionals as well, which a lot of our listeners will be, that is an important thing, and we have to have CPD hours noted and things like that for professional bodies and maybe workplaces and things. So it's good to know that this is something that they could be attributed to that, because again, it is a really important career skill as well, in developing your career. If you're listening well, we've talked a lot about it in terms of well-being, but actually in a career space, it's very important transferable skill also in being able to navigate the workplace and to work, colleagues who may be from different places with different experiences. There's a high likeliness that is the case. So, listening in the workplace is a really important thing as well. So can we just talk about that for a little second? Like I say, we've talked, I mean, obviously mental well-being and well-being in the workplace is important as well. So on that point, it covers us, but in terms of as a career skill, what would you see the benefit to people of listening well as a career skill? What would you see the benefits of that?
I think the benefits of listening well for anybody, but as a career skill, people to grow in their own self-awareness is such an important skill in every career, every workplace environment. It's that ability to really respect every individual, to recognize everyone has their own story, everyone has their own circumstances, and people go through different seasons of life. And, within the workplace, to recognize just to recognize that person is a human being, and they're working, but they've got maybe different things they're working through in their lives at different seasons. So just knowing that they can be listened to, they can be heard, they can be respected, they can be real and authentic. I believe those are just life transforming values that enhance, a person's living and well-being in the workplace.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think one of the big things that we miss, I said it before, it's the missing piece in the conversation. We're always telling people talk. Yeah. We're not telling people listen, and there needs to be a bit of both before we actually make progress. And I think for me, we're talking a lot about mental well-being, but also what's big in workplaces just now is diversity, inclusion, respect.
Yeah.
Listening has got to be part of that conversation, hasn't it? Because you talked about there, understanding that we're all individual human beings with individual experiences and needs. Without listening, we're not doing that very well, are we?
Absolutely not. And Listen Well Scotland's really committed to, diversity and inclusivity. This is for all people of all, whatever their situation, whatever their background, just being respectful and showing the value of every person, that they are important, their situation, whatever they say is valuable and important for them. And that makes such a difference in terms of normalizing that person's experience and accepting them and enabling them to know that it's really okay to talk, and whatever they say, they will not be judged, they will not be criticized, they will just be accepted and understood. And that's very powerful.
Absolutely. And as a person in a workplace, having a workplace that has a culture of that, listening, of that, awareness, that level of awareness, surely makes it a much better and more pleasant place to work as well. And just, surely a place like that will have people who thrive, rather than people who feel, scared to come out or scared to talk about what it is they're experiencing. If we're all listening well and we're all supporting each other, surely it's a much better culture, better place to be.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned culture, Anne, and right at the beginning, you said that the vision of Listen Well Scotland is to see a listening culture across Scotland. And I mentioned listening schools. Part of our passion as a charity is to see every school become a listening school, a school where it's safe to talk, and there are safe places to talk and safe people to talk to, and to see every workplace as having that listening culture where it's safe to talk in a place where people will listen well. A change of culture, I believe it can happen as we see Scotland as a nation of listeners. Why not?
Well, it certainly sounds like a wonderful thing to be striving for sure, and I believe with you as well that it can happen. I just think, for me, I think a lot of people don't realise that is the missing link. And certainly for me, until I came across this and had some self-reflection on it, realize, this is the missing link. We say we're talking to people, telling people talk more, but it just seems that we're talking and we're still up against some of the same challenges, and we are slowly making progress towards a better society and a better culture, but there is a missing piece for me, and I really do feel like it's this listening piece. I don't feel like it's landing as well as it could be, because we've not learned how to listen well yet. And I really do think this, if people get on board with this, and I really hope that they do, can really just make things better for so many people, whether it's well-being wise, career wise, a culture of inclusion wise. I just think there's so many good things that can come from the better listening, across the board, in schools, in workplaces. I think this has got the potential to really just change the way we think about things.
I believe that too, and that's why I've decided to volunteer my time as with this charity. And it's schools, it's workplaces, it's community, it's families too, listening in families. I think that's really important, and among our friends. So it's at every sphere of society.
Absolutely, it can be applied anywhere, really, absolutely can. So listeners, I want you to really engage with this if you can. Like I said, we have the sponsored places for the training course, but I also hope, if you've thought that this might be useful, that you will get in touch with Listen Well Scotland. So Linda, would you like to just recap us where the website is, and if you know of any of the social media platforms that Listen Well is on, if you just name them? And what we will do is we'll include those in the show notes so that you can just directly jump there if you want to find out more.
Brilliant. Thanks, Anne. It's just been wonderful to meet you and talk. Yes, the website is www.listenwellscotland.org.uk, and you'll also find Listen Well Scotland on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. And if you go there, you'll find details of the online course, Let's Get Listening, which is the entry point. And just as a final word, everyone can learn to listen well. I really believe that. And let's get listening above the radar, and people realize that there's a lot more to listening than we think, but we can all be trained to listen well.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for that. And if someone was looking to start this journey and to listen well and to be trained to listen well, what would be your top 3 tips or your top 3 points of how they could get started?
Well, I would suggest, first of all, go to the website or one of the social media pages, sign up to this Let's Get Listening online course. It's so accessible. It will have such an impact. That will be the great start to your listening journey. And then I guess a third tip is just to understand that you can learn to listen well. And as you learn the skills of listening, they can be transferable into every part of your life, and you can make a positive difference to someone somewhere, and you too will find your own well-being is enhanced.
Excellent. Brilliant benefits for someone looking to get started on this, and I really hope that our listeners get involved in this project as well, because I think it's super important. I think if we're talking about conversations around mental health, mental well-being, inclusion, diversity, respect, fairness, listening needs to be and must be part of that conversation going forward. So Linda, I just want to thank you so much for your time and joining me today. You and the work of Listen Well Scotland are both remarkable, and thank you for sharing those insights with us today.
Thank you so much, Anna, for the invitation. It's been a real joy.
You're very welcome. Listeners, if you are overcoming a challenge or moving towards your next one, please remember the Determinator Collective is here for you. Thanks for listening, Determinators.